The House File 2542 has righteous goals of trying to protect Iowans from repeat offenders. We know that more than a third of the crimes committed in Iowa are committed by a repeat offender, and that a majority of violent crimes, a vast majority, in fact, according to some studies, more than 80% of violent crimes are committed by repeat offenders. However, we also know, and it's well documented, the challenges with this bill. Obviously, there would be tremendous cost to implementing this bill. And more importantly, I believe, is the imbalance that could occur in our criminal justice system with punishments. And the ideas of punishment with justice for victims and with rehabilitation for criminals. And we heard in the subcommittee important words of rehabilitation from Mr. West and Ms. Gibbs, who talked about how if this bill had been in place, they would not have had the opportunity to rehabilitate their lives and get on the right track. Additionally, there is concerns on some of the technical language of the bill, including sentencing versus time served. And the reason we have an amendment today, charges versus convictions. So, Mr. Chairman, that will take me to, and would ask that you call up Amendment 3484 to House File 2542.
Amendment 3484 will be considered. You are recognized for opening comments on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This just simply strikes charges against the person and instead inserts conviction. That concludes my opening remarks on the amendment.
Are there questions or comments on the amendment? Seeing none, you are in order for closing comments.
I move the adoption of the amendment.
Senator Bousselot moves Amendment 3484. Short form has been requested. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The amendment has been adopted. We are back on the bill as amended. Are there questions or comments? Senator Petersen, you are recognized.
I know that this bill is being portrayed as a tough-on-crime bill, but what it really is a tough-on-taxpayers bill. Anyone that looks at the state's budget situation and back-to-back billion-dollar deficits would understand that not only is this bill going to be tough on taxpayers, if this was fully implemented, it would be tough on our K-12 system. It would be tough on our healthcare system. It would be tough on most of the priorities and services that Iowans depend on from their state government. And this bill is not ready for prime time, and I'd urge a no vote.
Are there other comments? Senator Knox, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. All right, I'm going to take a different approach on this one. So I'm looking at this list that we got from Lisa Davis Cook on bills or crimes that would still count as points towards your 20-year sentence. So if Senator Blake, who I know is bragged about his skill in picking NCAA basketball teams, won his pool 6 years in a row at $500 or more, would have to spend 20 years in prison. Probably not a good use of prison space, which we're already 24% overcrowded. And we've already talked about, in order to fulfill what this bill wants to do, we would have to build at least another prison, if not multiple prisons, at billions and billions of dollars just in construction. And we would also have to staff it. We're already understaffed. So tell me where we would find the staff to do this work, not only in just incarcerating people for longer, which we heard would be from an average of 5 years to 12 years for folks living in prison, but we would also then have to let the best of the worst out. And that's what the parole folks told us before on another bill I was at, that the best of the worst, they would have to make decisions on letting people out that they would not want to let out just because we would implement a 20-year mandatory sentence on somebody that won their NCAA pool of $500 6 years in a row. So the bill makes very little financial sense. It makes very little public safety sense as well, which we heard from people at the subcommittee. Those folks would have also, and I know those folks personally, I work with those kind of folks every single day in my job, and a lot of the things that happened to them were their fault, yes, and we do want to make sure that we are protecting the community and violent crime and keeping violent criminals off the streets, but this bill just doesn't do it in the right way, not only just because it puts small-time criminals away for way too long, it also just costs our state way too much money. So I would urge a no vote now and kill this thing here and not move it on any farther than what we have to. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Blake, you are recognized.
Yes. I understand, again, and to kind of piggyback off of Senator Bousselot, I understand what the goal of this is. I sat with the County Attorneys Association. I understand there's frustrations of people that are in prison that are coming out, maybe prematurely. But from the facts that Senator Izaah just put forward, where we're 24% over capacity already, I think there are some fundamental issues with our current system in place. I think we need to take a much more nuanced perspective, sit down. I'm happy to sit down with whomever during the interim to sit down and actually do a serious conversation related to how we do criminal justice in this state. What this is, though, is a bazooka approach. This is not this approach, I mean, from the fiscal note, would look at adding 15 more prisons, one more maximum security prison, at the cost of $8 billion. But then if you also look at it, some of this data, it said it was about, for the maximum security prison, it was about $450 million. When we looked at other states, it was closer to $1 billion. There haven't been any prisons that have been built to that. You probably would have 50% to whatever that fiscal note was, and that's probably the actual true cost of what this would be. This, to me, is not a serious approach to how we do criminal justice reform in this state. And again, I think this should end here today. I hope we all vote no on this bill to stop the conversation on this particular track. I'm willing to make this a bipartisan approach, that we work together and try to figure out how to to address potentially the overcrowding, to address the fact that we don't have enough corrections officers to staff our prisons that we have right now, to look at maybe there are ways that we should keep some folks that are more violent from being able to get back into the community and figure out some of these ways. I'm willing to have that conversation. This is not the way to do it. So I hope that we vote no on this today, go back to the drawing board, and let's take a serious approach to how we do criminal justice in this state. I will be the first to volunteer to help with that initiative. This is not how we should do the approach, and I hope we vote no today.
Senator Weiner, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would echo what my colleagues have said. Safety of community and of victims should be our #1 priority. And what this would do is force the Department of Corrections, as Senator Knox was saying, to release some of the best of the worst, to release some more violent offenders into the community in order to make room for the people who would be caught up under this bill. Arguably, if we want to spend money, in addition to what Senator Petersen was referring to in terms of funding schools, we also need to fund our justice system adequately. The probation and parole system is not adequately funded. Because of low pay and lack of support, fewer attorneys are willing to serve as judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys. There are fewer court reporters available. And not having defense attorneys or court reporters means that cases get delayed or even dismissed. And what my county attorney and other attorneys I've talked to have said deters crime more than the severity of sentencing is the swiftness and certainty of justice and of the system. So being tough on crime means adequately funding the courts, public defenders, prosecutors, police, and probation officers. And I believe if we're going to take a look at the justice system and how we protect our communities and protect victims, that should be our focus, not the direction this bill goes. So I too urge a no vote. Thank you.
Senator Bisignano, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to come in a little bit different approach. As I look over historically what we're done in funding for education in relationship to the funding we put in the justice system, where do we think our population from prison comes from? Statistics are there. Our population in our prisons, our correctional system, comes from the poorest. It comes from neglected. This starts in early childhood education. We won't fund universal preschools, where we need to find the children that are not only being abused and being neglected, but have learning disabilities. We know that by third grade, that if you're not capable of reading proficiently, that your chances of going on and graduating high school reduce. And we can also talk about children put in foster care that are non-instability, like many of our children. If you look to see who gets the death penalty, which Iowa doesn't have and thankfully doesn't, it's poor people. It's people with learning disabilities. What we're not doing is equating disability, neglect, early childhood education with reducing crime. We're more than happy to invest in the future of a child in a prison cell than we are in a well-funded classroom, in a well-funded daycare, in a stable environment, with adequate food, as we still try to reduce SNAP benefits. And so that's where our population, if you look at these studies and you look at the numbers, Iowa isn't growing in population, only in criminals. Now think about that. It's the criminal population that we can count on. It shows you here. It shows you to the tune of almost $8 billion, when our entire state budget's $9 billion. That's a sad statement for society. It's a sad statement for Iowa. And so as we reduce budgets, or we don't increase budgets, and we don't go to early childhood education to recognize learning disabilities, is probably the best indicator of a future criminal. I don't think that's disputed. But here we are looking to put people in prison for 20 years, and nobody that I'm serving with in my caucus supports violent crime. We don't like violent criminals, but what makes a violent criminal? And nothing's 100%, but a large percent of the violent criminals come from abuse, whether they're sex abusers, domestic abusers, or just violent individuals, because that is what they were raised with. But instead of trying to intercede and show a different way through education and stability, a place to live, how many of our kids, at least in Des Moines, that live in cars? They're living in cars or homeless facilities. And they may go through 4 or 5 elementary schools in 1 year. It's not hard to figure out why Iowa, besides corn, grows criminals. But we put the effort into corn. We take care of that. Because we know if we do the right things, we're going to have a good yield. Well, it works the same way with human beings. And so I wish that we took the interest in finding children at a young age, whether it be through food assistance, housing assistance, but learning disabilities, being able to hear, being able to see. Those are all important components to education. No, we're waiting for them to grow up and then harm one of us, and then we want to put them away. But they've already got their structure. It's a criminally bent structure based on their lifestyle. Why don't we stop it when they're down here? When there's no good daycare, there's no stability, they're moved into foster care and then they're abused there. That we don't want to investigate to make sure our foster care is the greatest care, because those are our children. But we don't. And then they become runaways. And then they're trafficked. And their spirit's being killed, and then they commit violent crime. That's where we need to go if we want to spend $8 billion. And we're not asking for nearly that much. We gave $21 million this year in supplemental aid. That doesn't even touch one of these prisons that we would have to build, or the future numbers of prisoners that we're going to have to house. It's just looking at life differently. Children are impressionable. They're resilient. That's what makes them hardened. They'll take the beatings, they'll take the neglect, but at some point they're going to turn on the society that neglected them. And that's what this bill is here for, to catch them after we've destroyed them. I would ask you not to support this. I would ask you to go back and look at the entire structure of how we deal with children to adulthood. Look at the numbers. The studies have been done. We know who the prisoners are. It follows poverty and abuse. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The chair recognizes Senator Quirmbach for comments.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I certainly believe that somebody who does harm to other people, whether it's physical harm or financial harm or emotional harm, deserves to be punished. And if the harm is significant enough, well, then they deserve, the perpetrator deserves to lose their liberty for some period of time. That's why we have jails and prisons. But I think that the determination of the length of a sentence is something that should not be trusted to some arithmetic algorithm. I think that is inherently a human judgment, and I think it needs to be exercised by the judge handling the case, determining the sentence. Now, judges sometimes make mistakes. They are human too. But I would trust judges who can look at the particular circumstances of an individual's background and the nature of the crime and the degree of harm, and can reach an appropriate judgment for determining the length of time that the perpetrator would be removed from society. Like I say, an arithmetic algorithm is not the way to justice. Justice is a human judgment, and I think we have jurists in position to make those judgments. I trust them. I realize they will make mistakes sometime, but I think that's the better course, to rely on them. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? I'm sorry, sir. At the committee level, it's just for committee members.
I just want to raise the point that it was served to the chair, the vice chair, and the majority leader via email prior to the convening of this, and would ask that you put on record, sir.
I Go ahead, I will look for it, but we are on, it's just a committee meeting now, but now it's noted. All right, any other comments or questions from the committee? Seeing none, Senator Bousselot, you are recognized for closing comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start my closing remarks by recognizing and thanking Mr. West and Ms. Gibbs for coming to the subcommittee. Their testimony was impactful to me, and I still regard it as brave. And I appreciate the challenge that it had to be to come and tell that story. We know from that, we heard at that subcommittee also from the sheriffs and deputies that unfortunately there's been increased data supporting the idea that there's been increased leniency on repeat offenders. And in my own personal experience, a family friend who lost a baby that was at a child care provider, and that child care provider was convicted of a crime and sentenced to prison. Sentenced to multiple years in prison and served just over 1 year in prison. And then moved back in down the street from this family friend who lost that baby at that child care provider due to their illegal and criminal conduct. And because of that early release, has detrimentally impacted their life to this day. And there is challenges with the sentencing that takes place for repeat offenders, and that we know repeat offenders are committing a vast majority of the violent crimes in our state, and that more than 1/3 of the crimes in our state are committed by repeat offenders. But I'll also say the challenges with this bill are not lost on me. I am sympathetic to the list that came from the Association for Justice on improving the bill. And I will say today that I don't believe that this bill, as written, strikes the appropriate balance between the very righteous public policy goals of protecting Iowans from violent repeat offenders and ensuring that the justice system delivers justice for victims while also not having proportional or appropriate punishments in place for people who can be rehabilitated and be productive and wonderful members of society. So I fully anticipate, Mr. Chair, that further amendment will and work needs to be done on this bill. But finding that balance and continuing to work on it this session is important. And so we'll continue, and I ask for support from this committee to move the bill forward so that those goals can, and hopefully a balance can be struck as part of the legislative process and with continued amendments. So, Mr. Chair, I would move House File 2542 as amended.
Senator Bousselot.